Recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Judge Samaniego, you said in one of your answers earlier that people come here because they're passionate, and you've advocated for allowing people to come in here. Do you think that's a reason why we should allow people into America on a legal basis, because they're passionate to come to America?
Well, no, I said they were here for different reasons. They just happen to be passionate as an additional component. I mean, they come because they're fearing what's happening in their community. I've talked to, like I said earlier, when they tell you that every day their mom or their dad calls them and says they come here looking for you every morning and they want to know where you're at, that's why they're moving in this direction.
Thank you. I'm really glad this issue in regards to Governor Abbott moving people to various cities around the country has come up. Have you been critical of Governor Abbott for what he's done?
Absolutely, absolutely, because when you send someone that's not organized and they don't know who's on that bus, and some of them are not sponsored, that's a huge burden on that community.
Have you been critical of the Biden administration when they've flown people all over the country in the dark of night?
I don't know of that taking place. I apologize.
So you have not seen, for example, I have an article here entitled "Biden Administration Quietly Flies Illegal Immigrants to New York in the Middle of Night," and we just heard from a fellow member on this panel saying they're doing it in Philadelphia also. Do you think that's right for the Biden administration to do that?
Well, I think it's an indication of that they have to decompress, because when we get flights that are going out, it's to decompress the system there with the Border Patrol and has nothing to do with our community.
So did you give the benefit of the doubt to Governor Abbott and say, well, maybe they're decompressing these people on their trips to these cities?
Well,
I mean, isn't it the same thing, Judge Samaniego?
No, it isn't, because it's not coordinated. We've never gotten a call from the governor to tell us, hey, what do you need? How can we help? How can we do things?
No,
and we just get buses.
I really appreciate that. Biden administration quietly flies illegal immigrants to New York in the middle of the night. That's what they're doing. We'll be happy to share this article with you so you can see what's happening there. Thank you for your answer. Sheriff Daniels, I was in your county in June of 2020. What's changed since June of 2020?
Well, we went from, just to put it in perspective, around 5% of my jail population was border-related, up to almost 45% now, 45%. We've seen the pursuits. Last year, we put 180 people in jail for pursuits that were deadly pursuits. When I say deadly, driving at 100 miles an hour plus, endangering communities. Some resulted in deaths. Some we interdicted before they killed somebody. We see the flow of public safety challenges in our community based on this border every day. So it's changed drastically as a result of this border.
Because what I heard from you sheriffs is that there was good coordination all the way from the local level, all the way up to the federal government, June of 2020. And that there was some control the border was becoming more secure. Is that generally an accurate statement?
Yes, Congressman. In fact, Border Patrol, when I pull up to the scene to help my deputies, the troopers, officers, or agents, they always make a point to come over and say, Sheriff, thank you for what you do. Thanks for being a voice for us.
We heard earlier that, I can't remember who it was that said that the increased fentanyl is not tied to illegal border crossings. Do you agree with that statement?
No.
And why not?
The criminal cartels are exploiting our border, whether they're trafficking children, adults, males, females, whether they're human smuggling for profit, or they're doing illicit drugs. Either way, the criminal cartels are exploiting a border, and I keep hearing the word, different words about how it's controlled. It's not effectively managed right now, and until it is, the cartels are they're the winners of this.
Those of you on the other side of the aisle, you can continue to wear blinders, or you can do photo op trips like the president did down to El Paso, where they clean up that region before he comes in. You can do that. But the American people are seeing very clearly what's going on. And now that we're in the majority, we're going to try to identify this as much as possible, because you're hearing the truth here from people like the sheriff, from the fentanyl families. And I hope you're meeting with those fentanyl families, because it's directly tied to the border. I want to just close with this. I hope as we go through this process, we also get more information out in regards to the NGOs, the International Organization for Migration, which has weaponized immigration into this country all the way from Panama up to the southern border. I hope we dig in deep to those NGOs that are complicit in the greatest human trafficking operation perhaps in the history of the world. I yield back.
Chair recognizes gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Is that right, Ms. Dean?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Inspector General and all of you, good to see you here today. You referenced Carter Page and the third authorization to spy on him. And there was a lie that was told to the FISC by former FBI attorney Kevin Kleinsmith. He ended up getting a sentence of 12 months probation, 400 hours of community service. And now, over the last week, it has been exposed as a result of the work of the leadership of this committee that the Secretary of State colluded with the intelligence community to lie to the American people about Hunter Biden's laptop. How effective will the reforms of Section 702 be if we can't trust our intelligence agencies? Justice, FBI, NSA, can we trust them to reform?
From my standpoint, I think it's all about verifying and controls and oversight. You have to build in the appropriate controls for these programs. And I think we've seen over the years, despite, as the ranking member just indicated, changes that have helped improve the process, they clearly haven't been sufficient.
Do you have a couple of mechanisms that you suggest that should be added?
Well, I think one of the things that clearly is being talked about is what the chair just mentioned about greater oversight by the FISC, by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, of various authorities under 702. I think there needs to be greater transparency. I think this notion that we get, we did a review recently of the FBI's Office of General Counsel and how it interacted with NSD, and in the course of that we found they had two differing views of what the querying standard was for 702 queries. And that's highly problematic. We would not have known that, the public wouldn't have known that unless we did our report. Having greater clarity, clear rules, public, transparent rules, rather than having this come up on the eve of every reauthorization, where there all of a sudden seems to be more and more transparency.
Thank you, Ms. Franklin, Ms. Williams. You can both, either of you can take a shot at this. Should we be taking a hands-off approach as the Judiciary Committee to this issue?
No, Congressman, you should not be taking a hands-off approach, and I am encouraged that this committee is starting its consideration of Section 702 now with the upcoming sunset at the end of this year. And I'd like to agree with the comments made by the Inspector General. It's important to pair reforms with rigorous oversight by Congress, by the Inspector General, and by the P Club and others.
So why don't I just follow up with my next question then, Ms. Williams. So, you know, we hear the sky's falling from some if 702 goes away. Isn't there a backup to that?
Congressman, I wish there were. It's not like the intelligence community doesn't have other authorities, but I don't think, this specific authority allows and puts actually some privacy and safeguards, but I agree not enough on the collection of information. But I would just say also, I think you really put your finger on it with your last question, because you said, should we trust? And obviously there's a long way to go to regain trust. From my perspective, as an oversight body, I feel like it's not my job to trust. It's our job to look at what's actually going on, to put strong guardrails in place and to recommend them to all of you.
Are you familiar with Executive Order 12333?
I am.
Yeah. Would that provide more or less protection than 702?
Well, it provides a different set of protections. It involves foreign collection overseas. It wouldn't apply with regard to communications that are traversing U.S. soil.
Mr. Horowitz, do you care to comment on that?
Well, one is a presidential executive order. The other is a statute. They are in two different spaces. But from my standpoint, having a clear congressional decision and statute is preferable than having internal guidance that, and executive order is public, but what we've seen mostly in 702 is internal guidance and querying standards that, for example, were not public, the most recent ones, until the last few days.
Thank you. I think there's a broader question here. Is the FBI's fixation on politics undermining crime fighting in America? I think about the Parkland shooting, horrible incident down in southern Florida. The FBI was warned about that. Are they misallocating resources at this point? Are they so focused on politics that they're not fighting crime in America, which this committee has shown very capably that we have a crime epidemic in America? I yield back.
I recognize the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Dingle, for the purpose of offering her amendment designated Dingle number 3. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment will ensure the Fish and Wildlife Services finishes its species status review of gray wolves. In September 2021, the Fish and Wildlife Service announced the status review after receiving petitions to relist and emergency list the gray wolf. And as several of my other colleagues have stated these statistics, these were the reason that this began, because following the November 2020 delisting of the gray wolf, we saw extreme numbers of wolves being killed. Idaho authorized the killing of 90% of their 1,500 wolves. Montana approved a statewide harvest quota of 450 wolves, representing 40% of the state's population, until an unprecedented number of Yellowstone wolves were killed. Wisconsin allowed the killing of 30% of its wolves in one hunting season. And just in the month of August that year, Idaho reported 17 killings of gray wolf pups, some as young as 1 week old. And because of this misguided delisting of the Northern Rockies population of gray wolves in 2011, gray wolves in the Northern Rockies were being baited, trapped, hunted, and killed in record numbers. I and others on this committee urged the service to do an emergency listing of wolves to stop the killing and give time for a thorough status review, and were disappointed that they only announced a 12-month status review. The court stepped in and restored ESA protections for the wolf populations. I know that's probably why that's part of this bill, but that's not what this amendment's about. Outside of the Northern Rockies, stopping the authorized hunts. Unfortunately, the Northern Rockies population continues to be vulnerable to the misguided state laws and policies that allow hunting, trapping, shooting, and baiting wolves and pay for wolf kills. The species status review is ongoing, and the Fish and Wildlife Service announced it would complete it and propose any next steps by February 6, 2024. It is critical that the Fish and Wildlife Service continue its process to assess the status of gray wolves in the lower 48 throughout the entire range, including the Northern Rockies. Delisting the species by an act of Congress shouldn't set back the scientific analysis. If we're to trust in science, as the bill sponsors, or the bill says, we should ensure that the scientific process is completed in a timely manner and allow it to inform any future listing decisions for that species. Before I urge adoption, I agree with you, my other chairman's gone, with Chairman Westerman, who says we need to be doing more money for habitat, and the states are better at. They do know, which is why I hope we're going to get the RAWA bill passed again this year. We pass it every year. We need to get it through the Senate. Therefore, I urge adoption of my amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Representative Dingle. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I rise to oppose this amendment. First of all, per our conversation earlier, it's duplicative. The states are taking care of the business here. As the gentlewoman from Wyoming laid out very well, as a member of the Natural Resources Committee back in our state legislature, I saw very clearly the millions of dollars that we spent in regards to wolf recovery, as well as making wolf depredation payments, significant amount of money that we put to that. I do have to say, though, to the gentle lady from Michigan, I know you're oftentimes sincere about this stuff, but I'm disappointed in the talking points that you were using, which the word extreme is being used all the time by every speaker on your side of the aisle in this debate. And you included my state of Wisconsin in extreme. And you cited that 30% of the wolves were taken in 2021. They were not. There were 218 wolves that were taken, Mr. Chairman. There are over 1,000 wolves in Wisconsin. That is a minimum count that is done by the state of Wisconsin, and it's shown consistently that there's about 1,000. There's probably 2,000 wolves in the state of Wisconsin. To say that there's 30% that were taken is a lie. Stop repeating it. The Natural Resources Board in the state of Wisconsin in 2021, after delisting, authorized for 200 wolves to be taken. The Department of Natural Resources unilaterally went around the Natural Resources Board, which is a citizen-led group. They went around the Natural Resources Board and said, we're going to reduce that to 117. Because if you took the 200 wolves that were authorized by the Natural Resources Board, and you look at 218 that were taken, that's less than 10% more wolves that were taken than normal, or that were authorized. And if you talk to wildlife managers, they will tell you, you know, that's within the margin of error. That is acceptable. The other thing I would point out, and I mentioned it earlier, in the paper that Adams wrote back in 2008 that has been peer reviewed, he said you can take up to, he used the number 29%. I'm going to round it off to 30%. You can take up to a 30% of a wildlife population, and it will still be a healthy population. That's a peer-reviewed scientific paper. You have, I'll go back to the, what was on the easel behind me just a few minutes ago. 26 wildlife biologists from the upper Great Lakes, including many that do work in your state of Michigan, they sent a letter to the judge out here in Washington, D.C. and said, you should not be overriding state management of wolves. You should not be relisting the wolf. That would have been about a decade ago, because it has recovered, and you are jeopardizing the Endangered Species Act. We heard the phrase earlier, I think on the other side, the 3 S's, which we all know is shoot, shovel, shut up. And that's what you end up encouraging as a result if people lose respect for the Endangered Species Act. I will just repeat what the gentle lady from Colorado said at the very start of this. The wolf has recovered. And the only reason that we're here today having this argument that's going to end up on a partisan vote, I suspect, is because there are a few corporate, environmental, animal rights group that this is their cash cow. Because I remember when I was in the state legislature, man, did they gin up the emails when we dealt with the wolf issue. It was the #1 thing that would hit my inbox. Europe, Australia, whatever. And where did they come from? They came from the groups that this is their cash cow. Because the science is clear, and we should trust the science. I urge a no vote on this, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? I will, Representative Boebert.
The ranking member, was that, okay.
I thank the chairman, and I'd like to yield my time to my colleague from California, Mr. Huffman.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado, and to my friend from the Central Valley. You know, I too have had communities devastated by catastrophic wildfire. I've lost constituents. We are still recovering in many cases from some of those wildfires. And so, Mr. Duarte, I think you understand that the Paradise Fire indeed was a terrible tragedy, but it wasn't caused by the Endangered Species Act. I think you know that it was caused by a public utility that failed to maintain its equipment. There was a piece of equipment that was over 100 years old that had not been inspected, that had not been maintained, and that failed in high winds during a critical drought where the entire landscape was a tinderbox. And that's why we got that fire, and that's why we got so many other fires. But to try to scapegoat the Endangered Species Act for a tragedy like that misses the actual accountability that's needed for that fire, and there actually was criminal accountability in that case found, and redirects the conversation back to politics in a really unfortunate way. So, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to—
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Neguse, would you yield? Of course. I think the reference was to, is it Pacific Gas and Electric? Is that the utility that you're
Correct.
referencing out in California? Weren't they denied permits to be able to upgrade their lines?
No.
They were not denied any permits?
The Public Utilities Commission regulates the requirements for line upgrades in this case. I'm not aware of any permit that was denied to upgrade this. In fact, what I'm aware of is that there's a book you could read on this. It's called California Burning. And it talks about how the corporate bottom line led to a failure to maintain and inspect and upgrade this equipment. And that brought us some of these tragic fires.
Mr. Neguse, would you yield to me for a minute? Okay, thank you very much. So California's got a wonderful history here over the last decade or two. They've gone the route of Western Europe, where they've taken their infrastructure and they've let it go in the dream of the green dream, and that the green fantasy was going to work. California's a failed state as a result of it, and that's part of the reason their infrastructure was not reinvested in, because California did not make it a priority. Who runs?
Wait, I'm gonna reclaim my time.
Who runs the state of California?
I thank the gentleman for reclaiming his time.
Runs?
I thank the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I gave you some time. Let me give my colleagues some time.
I thank the gentleman. Back on Planet A, there has been a lot of scrutiny and a lot of investigation and actual criminal proceedings and civil proceedings on this subject. Nowhere in any of that was it found that the Endangered Species Act was the culprit behind these tragic wildfires, and shame on anyone who would suggest otherwise. I yield back.
Johnson is recognized.
Is the southern border secure?
I think the southern border represents a massive security threat.
So what we've heard from you today is that fentanyl has become a really big problem, and that you're having to put more resources to it. Is that correct?
Towards fentanyl, yes. Yes, we are.
And the related gangs. I mean, you just retailed some of the story.
Right.
So this all happened over the last couple of years as the border has become unsecure. Is the southern border secure?
Well, again, we're not— I want to defer to the Homeland Security, which is responsible for the physical security of the building. I will just tell you from the FBI's perspective that we are seeing all sorts of very serious criminal threats that come from across the border.
And getting worse, correct? You're putting more assets towards it?
We certainly do. We have, as I said—
So it's becoming more of a priority for you?
It is becoming more and more of a priority for us, yes.
So in the Durham report, and we heard from Mr. Durham just a couple weeks ago, he said the FBI failed to uphold the important mission of strict fidelity to the law, and that predates you. Do you agree with that statement that Mr. Durham made?
Yes, I do.
Was Russia collusion a hoax? So in light of the Durham report and that, was Russia collusion a hoax?
What I would say is this. One as to the Durham report itself, and one as to the issue of Russia malign influence. As to the Durham report itself—
Be quick.
I will try. The conduct it describes is conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative of who I see the FBI is every day, and must not ever be allowed to happen again.
And on the other side?
Second, on the other one, it is not seriously disputed that the Russians, among other foreign adversaries, have attempted to interfere in our elections. And there have been any number of findings to that. In fact, President Trump himself rightly declared a national emergency about foreign interference in our elections in 2018.
So as a result of the actions of James Comey, the disgraced James Comey, and the FBI, they've interfered with the elections in both 2016 and 2020. Will that interference happen again in 2024 by the FBI?
The FBI is not going to be interfering in elections.
They did in 2016.
Well, I don't know that that's what Mr. Durham found. What I would tell you again is that there was conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative.
You can be in denial if you want to.
I'm not in denial,
Mr. Director,
sir.
you can be in denial on this. That's exactly what happened. Last year, the FBI gave a defensive briefing to my home state Senator Johnson, and you can see the slide up there now. And then that defensive briefing was leaked to the Washington Post. Who ordered that briefing?
So defensive briefings, when it comes to election matters, including in the last administration, under a procedure set up by the last administration, are an interagency process coordinated by the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And the way that works is the interagency concludes that a defensive briefing is appropriate, and the FBI is given information from whatever intelligence community agency supplies it, and then we provide it. Defensive briefings, it's important to understand.
Senator Johnson, that's his quote. He's up there with you and Hunter Biden. I knew it was a setup. And he asked you this question back in November of last year, and he said, I knew it was a setup. And that goes back to the point about interfering in elections. Senator Johnson was one of the most vulnerable Republican incumbents, if not the most vulnerable Republican incumbent, that was a target of the Democrats in the 2022 election. And then you see this briefing happen, and he knew what was happening, that there was someone or some people within the FBI and the intelligence arena that were going after him. Did Joe Biden take payments from Burisma or any other foreign companies as vice president, president, or private citizen Biden?
As you may know, there is an ongoing investigation being led by the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, Mr. Weiss, appointed by President Trump in the last administration, that our Baltimore field office is working with, and I would refer you to him as to what, if anything, can be shared.
So the president is under, investigation.
I'm not going to confirm or speak to who is or isn't under investigation for what. I'm simply going to tell you.
So he's not under investigation?
I didn't say that either. By long-standing department policy and practice, I'm not going to be confirming or denying who is or isn't under investigation or for what.
Thank you. I'll close with this. Russia collusion started it, Mr. Chairman, and the targeting and the suppression and the censorship has continued until this point. We need to thoroughly review what the FBI is doing, and at a minimum, I will be allowing FISA to sunset if we're not going to see significant reforms in the agency. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray.
And if I may address you that way, do you believe in the rule of law?
Yes.
Okay, so parole is a very specific concept in the law here in the United States of America that is supposed to be done on a case-by-case basis. That has been wiped out by fiat without passing a law to change the law that enabled parole back in 1954. They have been breaking the law. 80,000 Afghans came in, all waived in via, virtually all waived in via parole. So in other words, the reason illegal entries, as you've been saying, have been going down is because they've ignored the law. So you want us to be a lawless country, is what we're hearing from you. By the way, from the other side, that fear-mongering conservative who has been talking about this regularly is Mayor Adams from New York City, that his city is being destroyed. His quote, not mine. The ranking member talks about no government witness that we've heard from. Oh, yes, we have. We heard from Mayorkas back in July. We heard from the FBI 2 weeks prior to that from Mr. Wray. We heard from Sheriff Mark Daniels from Arizona. Let's share a couple quotes. FBI Director Wray, we are seeing all sorts of very serious threats that come from across the border. He closed by saying, it is becoming more and more of a priority for us. Sheriff Mark Daniels, in regards to fentanyl, the border is not effectively managed right now, and until it is, the cartels, they are the winner of this. I asked Secretary Mayorkas about that. Who's telling the truth? FBI Director Wray or you? He wouldn't answer the question. I asked him, who's telling the truth? Sheriff Mark Daniels, who is seeing the fentanyl flowing in since January 20th of 2021 in numbers that have skyrocketed, and Secretary Mayorkas says, no, there's not a problem here. Who's telling the truth? He wouldn't answer the question. It's this whole approach that we're hearing, there's nothing to see. For those of you a certain age like me, you'll recognize it as the Sergeant Schultz approach. I see nothing. For those of you that are a little bit younger than I, you'll recognize it as the Harry Potter story with the Ministry of Magic. Mr. Marino, it is said that we have done nothing here. The House of Representatives passed H.R. 2. We have not proposed solutions. Is H.R. 2 a solution to the border crisis that we have?
Yes, it is. It restores a layered approach overall to border security and immigration enforcement. It restores law and order. As I previously said, the major causation of this crisis has been the Biden administration's abandonment of law and order. And we are seeing this perfect storm of poor policies at the federal level to the local level. Poor policies, abandoning law and order at the federal level, and then it's exploiting the poor policies of abandoning law and order in sanctuary cities. And it's leading to chaos. The one thing that this Biden administration has proven to us is that when you remove all structure through law and order, it results in chaos.
Mr. Chairman, I want to highlight here for the American public that may be watching at this point, this body has passed legislation to secure the border, to bring a solution forward. Mr. Bensman, I really appreciate that Representative Biggs brought up the Darien Gap. I was there a little over 2 years ago. There were lots of people coming through there at that point. The people in Bajo Chiquito, a little Indian village right on the edge of the Darien Gap, were talking about being destabilized. I have a text from the last couple days from someone who is down there. The scene is truly apocalyptic. Bajo Chiquito is completely overrun. Thousands. They had about 500 when I was there that had rolled through that day, and they viewed it as destabilizing. Thousands now, possibly more arriving every second. Is this destabilizing the country of Panama?
Actually, Panama has a policy in place called controlled flow. So they are moving all of those migrants through into Costa Rica as fast as possible by bus so that they do not destabilize the country. They've always done that. Costa Rica does the same thing. They essentially, the governments are the smugglers in that case. They are moving them through rather quickly. However, the numbers that are passing through right now, I don't know. I don't think we've seen anything like this particular number right now that's happening, that's going through. It will certainly overwhelm the Panamanian and Costa Rican capacity to move them through like normal.
So they send them here?
They're all coming here.
I yield.
Everyone's coming here.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 66, printed in Part F of House Report 118-216. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 66, printed in Part F of House Report number 118-216, offered by Mr. Tiffany of Wisconsin.
Pursuant to House Resolution 723, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, my bipartisan amendment ensures that none of the funds made available by this bill will go towards funding a rule that will ban flavored milk like chocolate milk in schools. This would ensure that all types and flavors of milk are available to school children. This summer it was reported that the USDA is considering banning chocolate milk from elementary and middle schools. USDA issued a proposed rule in February that would set new nutrition standards for school meals. If implemented, the new standards proposed could limit the amount of flavored milk like chocolate, and strawberry in high schools, while children in elementary and middle schools would be restricted to a variety of unflavored milk. This rule would affect roughly 30 million students who participate in the school meal programs. According to the Journal of the American Dietetic Association, removing flavored milk from schools resulted in a 62 to 63% reduction in milk consumption by kids in kindergarten through 5th grade, as well as a 50% reduction in 6th through 8th grades. Milk is full of rich nutrients that support bone growth and development, and millions of children enjoy drinking it. We should not be funding rules that would limit our children's access to delicious and nutritious products like milk. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this bipartisan amendment, and I reserve.
The gentleman from Virginia seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I seek the time in opposition.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this amendment, as the gentleman from Wisconsin has said, prohibits funds from being used to finalize, implement, administer, or enforce the milk section of USDA's proposed rule that aligns nutrition standards to the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. This appropriations rider is preemptive as the final rule hadn't even been released by the department, and it's out of place because this issue should be taken up within the context of a child nutrition reauthorization, not an appropriations rider. But this amendment disregards the normal scientific process currently being undertaken to establish the nutrition guidelines. School meals and beverages are required to be consistent with the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which are evidence-based recommendations set to provide nutritional guidance. This amendment would effectively undermine the unbiased, evidence-based process that ensures that children receive the most nutritious meals and replaces that scientifically based process with a political process. It is critical that science continue to guide the process in determining options in school, and the regulations are updated to align with the newest dietary guidelines using a process that intentionally allows for adaptations in line with the latest scientific and expert recommendations. Importantly, the Department of Agriculture specifically has requested public feedback on their proposed milk options for consideration when crafting the final rule. But the bottom line is that scientific experts, not politicians, should be the ones to determine the nutrition standards that ensure that our children get the healthiest meals possible. A dozen organizations, including the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Heart Association, have all urged Congress to continue to respect the scientific-based process and not interfere with the normal procedure. For these reasons, I urge a no vote on the amendment. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize my friend and neighbor in the 3rd Congressional District of Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I rise today in support of this amendment. Thank you, Tom and Mr. Speaker, which will continue the allowance of flavored milk in school nutrition programs. Dairy products deliver nutrients critical to children's health and development. Milk is the top source of protein, calcium, potassium, phosphorus, and vitamin D for children ages 2 to 11. Dairy also provides nutrients vital for immune health. Unfortunately, children are not consuming enough dairy to benefit from these essential nutrients. Removing flavored milk from schools only deters school-aged children from drinking milk even more, and ask my colleague to support this amendment to continue to fully allow non-fat and low-fat flavored milks in grades K through 12 to ensure our children have access to nutrients that they need. And I would say to my Democrat colleagues on the other side of the aisle that we must be cautious when we're speaking about conflating politics with science, and we've learned that over the last 3 years. With that, I yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman has the only time remaining.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 1 minute.
I thank my friend Mr. Tiffany for the amendment, and I want to, with him, speak on behalf of parents and children, not on behalf of politicians and so-called scientists, this is what we know. We shouldn't even be having this conversation because we didn't enact this federal government to ban things from us. We want to make the decisions. Children want to make the decisions. Parents want to make the decisions. We know what's best for us. We don't need them to tell us. We'll figure it out ourselves. And over the course of a couple hundred years, we've done pretty well here without scientists and politicians telling us and our children what's good or what's bad. Let me tell you what's good and what's bad. What's bad is school lunches today. You know how I know? Because kids don't want to eat them. So all the nutrition they're getting, they're not getting because they don't want them. The only time they're going to eat them is if it's the only thing that they've got to eat, and you're limiting that now. It's absurd. And I so thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for offering it. I hope that we win this amendment and kids and parents can finally make choices for themselves. I yield back.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania. Mr. Speaker, in many ways, this may be the least of the amendments that you will hear tonight, but it's actually, I would say, the most of the amendments. And here's the reason why. Because when you have a federal government that believes that they need to regulate the milk that is served in our kids' schools across America, you have a federal government that is out of control. When you have a federal government that has a border, that we've become a borderless country, when our federal government has become perhaps the largest human trafficking operation in the history of the world, when you have a federal government that will not take us back to energy independence, where gasoline is now back up to $4 a gallon, where I live in northern Wisconsin, when you have a federal government that has fueled inflation like we haven't seen for 40 years, what in the world are they doing? What in the world are they doing trying to regulate what milk is served in our kids' schools? And that's why we're here tonight trying to pass these amendments, because they get America back into a place of fiscal responsibility, but also sanity from what we have seen over the last couple years with this profligate spending that's been going on. And finally, I would just like to say that I come from America's dairyland, and you damn right I'm going to fight for milk in our kids' schools. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Mr. Abt, are you saying the lockdowns did not work?
I'm
the
not sure
lockdowns led to higher crime, is what I heard you say.
No, I certainly did not say that, Congressman. Can you repeat the question?
You said during the COVID lockdowns that crime went up in 2020.
During the pandemic, they went up, yes.
And so the American people were locked down. I came here, and I was sworn in here on May 19th of 2020. I couldn't believe I could drive from the suburbs of Virginia to this location right here in about 5 minutes. Nobody was here. You said violent crime went up. So didn't the COVID lockdowns, weren't they part of the contributing factor?
I think that's an inappropriate connection between these two. I can't speak to that.
Deputy Mayor, D.C. Council Chairman Phil Mendelson said there is not a crime crisis in Washington, D.C. Do you agree with him?
Oxford defines a crisis as a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, and so I would say that we find ourselves in an intense time of trouble or danger. So I would say there is a crisis anytime someone's a victim of crime in the district, regardless of the number.
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like we've identified part of the problem here with the D.C. Council when somebody will not acknowledge that there's a crisis, and by the very definition, as the Deputy Mayor said, there is a crisis. Mr. Pemberton, so we're hearing about guns are the problem, and guns coming from other states are the problem. Are crimes being prosecuted to their fullest that include guns here in D.C.? Is prosecution, are the judges giving the fullest sentences they can with gun crimes?
No, absolutely not. So some of the rhetoric that we hear around crime in the district is that it comes from illegal guns and that we have to focus on illegal guns. and that if we find a way to get illegal guns out of the hands of criminals, crime will come down. And that's not necessarily wrong. And our officers for our union, I think last year we arrested about 3,100 people for possession of an illegal firearm. The problem is that even when we're able to get those cases papered and prosecuted and then a conviction, the average sentence that judges are handing out right now for that penalty is 6 months supervised release, which is 0 jail time. That is the going rate, is what we say, for people who are in possession of illegal guns.
Repeat that, 6 months?
6 months of supervised probation. So that would be someone who's convicted of being in possession of an illegal firearm in the District of Columbia. The maximum penalty is 5 years under the DC Code. However, the penalties that DC Superior Court judges are handing out regularly are more along the lines of probation only.
Probation only for a gun crime.
That's right, and just to make a finer point on this, it doesn't seem like the city takes those crimes as seriously as they suggest, given the fact that the courts are not penalizing people who are found convicted of those crimes.
Was that your experience, Mr. Jablonski?
Absolutely. If I didn't make that victim impact statement, the defendant's attorney was asking for divergence, and I was told by the DAs afterwards that they're glad that I came because most likely he would have received divergence.
Is Victim Services doing their job in D.C.?
I mean, they were very nice and, they were helpful. But there's really, the only thing I wanted to see real justice. I wanted to see something that showed me that they took into account what happened to me and my family, and what I saw wasn't.
Mr. Sobolewski, is Victim Services doing their job in Washington, D.C.?
I'd say they're doing their job. It's hard to say that the police, the prosecutors, and the judges are doing their jobs. Maybe the police are out there making arrests. Prosecutors aren't prosecuting. What's going on there? Judges, they're letting criminals out on the street. My guy was given 1 year in jail. What did he do within weeks upon release? My father-in-law was murdered by a guy with a rap sheet to 1971. Why are they on the streets?
Have you lost, Mr. Pemberton, have you lost officers to other jurisdictions around this region?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. A lot of the officers that leave have been going to neighboring jurisdictions. Particularly what's interesting is Northern Virginia takes a lot of our members.
I'm going to close with this, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make the case once again. I want this committee to come to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to hear the story here. We've heard it in New York City, Chicago, and now in Washington, D.C. I urge this committee and the chairman to schedule a hearing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the district attorney said, will I divert some who will go on to kill someone? Absolutely. That's the problem here in the United States of America, is a soft on crime attitude. Hey, Jim. First of all, I will deign to respond in regards to the gentleman from California in regards to anti-Semitic tropes, in particular in regards to one gentleman named Tom Steyer. That had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. He was a presidential candidate. He was taking his enormous wealth and putting it into a presidential campaign. And in America, it is fair game to be able to criticize someone when they've chosen to enter the field of politics. And the gentleman, Mr. Steyer, threw in huge dollars. He was described by the gentleman from California as a philanthropist. He was a presidential candidate who has thrown in hundreds of millions of dollars to political campaigns here in America. That is fair game. Using the cudgel of racism to stop free speech is also wrong. Mr. Marcus, if you could do it real briefly. So many of us, I have 3 children, much the same age as them. Where's this intolerance coming from? Where is this intolerance that really is a bit foreign for someone who went to college, a few decades ago? And not just the anti-Semitism. Where's the intolerance coming from?
Mr. Chairman, this has been a long time coming, and the intolerance towards other groups is not unrelated to the intolerance towards Jews. We have, for too long, seen political polarization throughout our country with extreme aspects on the college campus. There are extremists on the left, there are extremists on the right, but on the college campus, the extremists on the left have considerably more influence, louder voices, and the greater ability to make their views heard. Oftentimes, that means not just presenting their own opinions, but trying to silence others.
Thank you for that. So I turn to Ms. Jordan. Why do administrators fear the left?
I would say that they fear the left because they don't want to hurt their feelings. I know that they probably are trying their best to, be equal, be fair, but it honestly feels like they are favoring those students. I know there are a lot of different departments within a Big Ten university, and so some of those, we have a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion spaces. So a lot of those that are, directly funded and directly associated with the university, those are especially the leaders in initiating the activities that I feel like, coddle left-leaning students and empower them to, attack us.
Because Mr. Ogerzak, isn't it true that they don't fear you on the right on campus, that you're going to tear things down, that you're going to go out and do a nasty demonstration to deny somebody from coming into the campus who comes from the left point of view to speak? I mean, I'm assuming the administrators don't fear you guys.
I would certainly hope that they would never expect us to commit any acts of violence against opposing speakers.
So we heard earlier in testimony, the quote was used in one of the panelists, we have failed them. By the time it gets to the Office of Civil Rights, we have failed them. So Mr. Marcus, why would we put more federal dollars into something like this? I think this is part of what you're hearing from some of us up here, is we are saying, is there really a federal role? Should we be pumping more federal dollars in? In fact, as we put more federal dollars in and we hear about more intolerance, less tolerance for free speech, are we going in the wrong direction by saying, federal government, you should try to do more? Because maybe the federal government is being counterproductive.
Mr. Chairman, my experience with the Office for Civil Rights is that it has had lean years and it has had fat years. In either case, the head of that agency has been able to do what the head feels needs to be done. That is to say, there may be in a particular year 15 or 17 or 19,000 cases, but the number of anti-Semitism cases will never be 1% and will seldom be 0.1%. So it is my sense that while there may be political reasons and a host of policy reasons to support either increases or decreases of the budget for that agency, and the Brandeis Center is a nonpartisan group, we don't support others, that the Office for Civil Rights can focus the resources it needs on fighting the problems that needed to be fought, as long as it has the political will and regardless of the budget in a particular year.
I want to get one more question in here for Ms. Silberstein. By the way, you are engaged with one of the most incisive questioners we have up here in Mr. McClintock. It is a terrific lesson many of us have learned. And why not tell parents just take your dollars elsewhere? If Cornell is going to act the way they do, Madison, University of Madison refuses to condemn pro-Hamas demonstrators chanting glory to the murders. Why not just tell parents to take your dollars elsewhere?
Of course, private individuals are entitled to do what they wish with their money. With regard to sending students to these schools, I've been faced with that question numerous times, and I've had to grapple with it myself about why I would put myself in such a situation that could potentially lead to my own harm. And I have gone to a Jewish day school my entire life, and coming to Cornell, I was hoping to encounter a variety of diverse perspectives from whom I'd be able to learn. And upon coming here, I've realized that, I've been hit with a lot of hatred and virulent anti-Semitism, and it's something that makes me feel the need and the right to be there more, to combat it, and to continue to fight against it, and to not let it win.
I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today. Thank you very much.
May I have a minute to clarify my words that were used? Is that possible within the rules?
Sure, the chair will give you let's take a minute. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I'm the one who said we failed them. And fighting hate and preventing hate is a whole of society job. We all have a job to do. And if all we do is investigate a crime after someone's dead because of their identity, I'm just saying we can interrupt it earlier. I hope we won't throw up our hands about what the United States of America and its government can do to help encourage our society to be more tolerant and moral. So let's please not throw up our hands. Interventions work. And when the FBI counts hate crimes, that is a deterrent. When a school has a policy against hate, all they have to do is post it online. There are less hate crimes. So let's just make the FBI count hate crimes. It's optional right now. Why?
So, Ms. Burdett, we can have more of a discussion on this offline. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for the time.
I yield and would like to recognize the gentle lady from Georgia for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as a woman of color.
Mr. Morgan, do you believe coal use should be ended in the United States of America?
I believe the market is speaking to that, and coal is no longer cost competitive.
Do you view Boiler Act, I'm sure you're familiar with that regulation from about a decade ago, do you view that as a market force?
I believe that there are a lot of headwinds against the coal industry, that even if you removed one or two, the overwhelming dynamic is going to be continued decline.
Is Boiler Act a market force?
I believe it is internalizing an externality and having the industry bear the cost of its pollution. So yes.
Appreciate your answer. Boiler Act is a federal regulation. Let me give you an example of its failure of what you call market forces. I have a mill in my district that installed a smokestack. They had to put up a higher stack. And the company invested north of $10 million in that. You know how much it reduced in emissions?
I do not.
None. Zero. It didn't reduce emissions at all. And this company had to spend $10 million of precious capital. That is not a market force. I can guarantee you that much. Mr. McCammon, was the 10-day rule working for you guys in Ohio?
Yes.
Mr. Moran, was it working in Alabama?
I'm here solely for Title IV. I don't do the regulatory side of things in my state.
And Mr. Wentland?
Absolutely, yes. The 2020 rule was a good rule.
Ms. Owens, are you rewriting that rule, the 10-day rule?
Yes, Representative, we are rewriting the rule.
What is the deficiency? Why are you rewriting that rule within your agency?
Well, there were several, when we reviewed the rule, there were several aspects of it that we determined we wanted to revisit. Among them were what we felt were unnecessary burdens that were placed on citizens who wanted to either file a complaint, a citizen's complaint, which the SMACRA gives them the right to do, and we wanted to make sure that they were having that opportunity without undue burdens in doing that.
Thank you. Would you say your bureau has issues with bandwidth and staffing at times that causes delays? I mean, we've heard some about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of your question.
Does your bureau have issues with staffing at times and just bandwidth to be able to get these processes done that causes delays?
Well, yes, we do have staffing issues, as many agencies do.
So why would you pull this back from the states? Why would you pull this back with the 10-day rule that is working, as these gentlemen to your left have said? Why would you pull that back if you've got staffing issues, if you have delays that are happening as a result of whether, call it bandwidth or staffing delays?
Well, thank you for your question, Representative. We have resources that review our regulations, and one of the things that we did at the beginning of this administration was to review regulations to determine if there were aspects of those regs that required are taking another look at them. And that is exactly what happened with the 10-day notice rule. And so we do have adequate staff that took a look at that rule and we have now proposed some amendments to the 10-day
Mr.
notice
Cammett,
rule.
do you expect emissions in your state to be reduced by the federal government taking additional authority away from you by amending or changing the 10-day notice rule?
No, we do not. I think we would expect that we would spend more time and less cooperation with OSM in investigating legitimate complaints with the reversal in the rule.
So as a result of delays, we actually could see more emissions by projects not getting done. Would that be correct?
Yeah, spending more time in responding to complaints that we have already responded to previously or have data or information on. So yes, it could cause further delays.
Ms. Owens, have you been instructed to stop or slow roll applications for coal projects?
No, sir, I have not.
Have you had anyone from the White House contact you and send a clear message that they want coal stopped?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.